need to check my time. I told I have 10 minutes, so I have to be careful here. Thank you very much, really, for inviting me to join here, and it's wonderful what the university really is doing. We wish more institutions, especially the institution across the road here, the government, does care about corruption the way you do. Very briefly, I was a businessman, and we did work in technology, and we worked in Africa, and in 2005 we sold my business, and we found I made some money, and we decided to give the money back to Africa. And the question was how to do that. And so we decided to do a foundation. But what kind of foundation? We decided from the outset we were not going to go out and give blankets or baby milk or malaria nets, although that's wonderful, and the people doing that, we applaud them. But the question in my mind was, why? Why people in Africa are poor? Because Africa as a continent is very rich. So why Africans are poor? And the answer to me is not dishing out blankets and baby milk, because we're going to keep doing that forever. Why those people? They don't need the milk, they don't need blankets. What they need is better governance, better leadership. Then they don't need our milk or our blankets or our malaria nets. This is a patient which needs a surgical operation, not aspirins. So while pain relief is wonderful, and I applaud all the people doing that, but I'm not one of them. I'm not a philanthropist. I'm a fighter, a campaigner for better governance and better leadership in Africa, because that's what is going to change us in Africa. People need to understand Africa is a huge country. Huge, it's a huge continent. I'm sorry, huge. I wish it was a country. It would have been much better. We're always also fighting for African integration, really, because it's important for our future. And there's not many African people around. We are only 1.2 billion. That's less than India, less than China. India, China, US, Europe, you can put all that in Africa, have more space. So we are not overpopulated by any means. We have a lot of valuable resources, but unfortunately, mismanagement of our natural resources, our human resources, led to this catastrophe we have seen developing in Africa. It is a catastrophe. There is no need to have all this. We have 600 million people in Africa without power. Do you understand what does it mean to don't have power? You don't have a life. You don't have business. You don't have education. You forget about internet, TV, whatever other. You are not there. You cannot live without power. You cannot prosper or build your economy or do anything. 600 million people. So that's why we decided to really focus on the issue of governance and leadership. And it is appropriate for us to do that because we are Africans. No African leader can tell us it's not your business. You are an imperialist. Because I'm an African. So I have the right to speak, and I have a right to hold those guys for account. And in order to do that, we developed the index and we developed the prize. The objective of all this, or the reason for all this, is we wanted to focus people's minds on the importance of governance and the importance of leadership, because that become an issue on the table. Please remember, nobody talks about governance in Africa for many years. First time the word corruption was mentioned, the World Bank, I think, Wilfonson in the about 30 years ago, dared to mention the word corruption. And he said that the official of the bank said, no, 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 no. The C word, we don't mention the C word. That is, unfortunately, was the situation there. And what we trying to do here is to really bring the issue to the center of conversation and help the young generation coming up. And there's a wonderful, much better generation than our generation. Our generation failed. We have to accept that. It is the young generation who really need to change what's going on there. So we need to work with those guys, and it is wonderful. We are moving forward. Lessons we learned from working in the last, since we started 2006, almost 16 years now. The most important lesson I have learned was that it's not enough to argue for governance and leadership and transparency in Africa. It's not enough. We need also governance, really, from the others as well. Without good governance in our partner countries, without good governance for the British government, the American government, the European, the Chinese, etc., it's difficult for us to achieve good governance in Africa. Without good governance from business, it is very difficult for us to really work in Africa. Let me give you an example. The Cold War, I think, was the worst period for Africa. It's worse, in my view, than the colonial period. During the Cold War, what mattered really is, are you with us or against us? It doesn't matter if you are bad, but if you are with us, it's okay. Even you are a bastard, you are our bastard. This is the words which are used by you know whom. Okay? And we saw dictatorships, thieves, criminals being supported by the big powers, whether Soviet side or the American side, just to get their votes, to get their minerals, to get their bases, to get whatever. And that was a very bad thing for Africa. And you can notice that improvement in African governance, a real democratization started to take hold in some of our countries only after 1989, the collapse of the Berlin Wall. Check that. Because nobody now became more interested now in grooming their bastards. It's finished. There's no more Cold War. Well, maybe we're going to have one now, and I don't know what effect that will have in Africa. We are worried. But that's another subject. So that was a bad period for us. Anyway, we hope everybody behaves. And business is a serious problem for us, Africa. And I say that, and I'm a businessman. And I am active in many business associations, etc. But unfortunately, we have a big issue about governance in business. Business also needs good governance. And nobody talk about that. Nobody talk about that. I'll give you an example. Look at illicit financial flows out of Africa. The estimates are between $89 billion UN side and $109 billion every year. Illicit financial flows out of Africa. Take an average 100 billion every year. The total amount of foreign aid going to Africa is $52 billion a year. So tell me, who is funding whom? Is that acceptable? And what is happening with this $100 million? It is mispricing, profit shifting, and all done by very respectable people, honored and titled and whatever, here in London, US, everywhere. That's something really had to stop. And that's something we have been shouting about for the last 16 years, and nobody pays attention. Recently, when Western Europe started to suffer some element of this misbehavior, when Starbucks started to be discovered they don't pay any taxes, Google, Apple, nobody pay taxes, and what the guys doing huge business. And then discovered all these funny schemes, and then people got up and said, oh, we need to deal with that. But that is something has to be handled. This illicit of financial flow is stealing money from our people. $100 billion a year. This means 600 million people without electricity. This means many million people going to bed without food. This means kids not going to school. We need to stop that, and we need to talk about transparency and business. And the problem is not just in the business, because you talk to the business people and say what I'm doing is legal. It is legal because the governments are enabling the business to do that. Governments should take action to stop that. Recently, they asked the OECD, came up with a report about profit shifting and business erosion, and we need action there. Enough talks. Simple issue like beneficial ownership of companies. If you are a dictator in Africa and you steal a few $1 billion, where are you going to put this money? You're not going to go down to the bank in the, down the street and to put the money there. You're not going to put it under your mattress. It's just too much. Where are you going to put it? You're going to put it in the UK. You're going to put it in the US. And we have been asking, this class of companies, which nobody knows who is a beneficial owner, what is the use of this? We managed to get a lot of very senior business people writing to G8 and to say, guys, we don't need this. Business doesn't need, we cannot take in our balance sheet a company which we do not know who owns it. We cannot deal with those guys. So why you are allowing this? This, again, an issue is really important, and it shows that bad governance here in Westminster, here in Europe, here in US. I was at the Summit of Democracy a few months ago. The American had this Summit for Democracy. Remember that? And Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary, was there. And she said, it's, yes, big money laundering in US. She said that. We have to stop that. The White House issued a statement last December saying, yes, we admit that this country has been a big enabler for money laundering. Would like to hear Johnson also speak about that, and the people here, and say us what you're going to do about it. Look at the farce development in front of our eyes in the last few months. Everybody here is running around to find who owns this mansion. Is it Abramovich? Who owns this boat? We cannot hold it. No, because they don't know. Why? Because we don't have a public register for these companies which nobody knows who's beneficial owner. We enable corruption. Did you watch Panorama about Abramovich a few weeks ago? I did watch it. And I was surprised to see, Abramovich went to the court to say, yes, I paid a bribe of 10 million to the people in the Kremlin so that they can fire the prosecutor and kill the case because I stole this asset. And the other guy said, no, I stole this asset. Both of them are criminals. And it's public in the court. Did anybody here do any issue about that? No, none. So I think before we start to talk about corruption in Africa, we need to talk about corruption here. Because the corruption here is enabling corruption in our places here. And I think my time is coming up, and I would have liked to have more time to talk about all these issues, but I really want to salute the University of Sussex for the way they care about corruption and talk about it. I hope more people in this country understand that, because this corruption kills people. People need to understand. People are dying. People are hungry. Kids cannot go to school. We cannot have immunization. We don't have, because of really these issues about governance. Yes, we have our bad apples in Africa. We are fighting that. But there is big issues also here affecting us over there. So we need your help. We need your voice. Thank you very much.
What I'd like to do first of all is just some very brief introductions. One of the primary reasons you're all here was to hear Mo speak, so he doesn't really need any introduction. However, that didn't stop me doing a bit of research on him. We all know about his role as a businessman and the foundation. I thought it would be interesting to see what he had said about other things, and corruption in particular, so I put Mo Ibrahim quotes into my search engine. And the first thing that came up was 14 quotes from Mo Ibrahim. The next item was 94 quotes from Mo Ibrahim, and the one after that was 128 quotes from Mo Ibrahim. So from this wonderful selection, I managed to pick out a couple of things that he had said. The first, of course, very pertinent for this evening's theme, as were so many of the things that came up in the quotes. He said, I came to the conclusion after his business career that unless you are ruled properly, you cannot move forward. Everything else is second. Everything. And I think that plays to his theme of good governance and leadership, which of course is what we'll be discussing this evening. The second was an interview in which he was talking about the penchant of wealthy people for owning yachts and sometimes fleets of yachts. And asked about his own fleet of yachts, he responded, I don't even have a small boat. I don't even have a toy boat in my bathtub. I don't have a biplane. I don't have anything. Those things are toys, and I don't need them to be happy. So, with that philosophy, thank you. Next on our panel, Baroness Valerie Amos. Reading Valerie's biography, wow, I mean, it's like somebody has put together a list of all the most famous things you could be head of, and there they all are. So just to pick out a couple of them, Governor General of Australia. No. Oh, no. Well, this was in
Governor General.
This was in your Wikipedia biography. High Commissioner. I'm so sorry. High Commissioner. Okay. I stand corrected, as I hope your Wikipedia. The Secretary of State for International Development, Leader of the House of Lords, Master of University College, Oxford. However, the most important thing about Valerie Amos is that she was interviewed by Jonathan Agnew on Test Match Special, which probably speaks to about a third of the people in the room. But I can tell you, it's really important, or less. It's really important. So welcome, Valerie Amos. Next on our panel is Pamela Wadi. It's a particular pleasure to have Pamela here this evening. She hails originally from Zimbabwe, but is known to us because she was a student on our Masters in Corruption and Governance, which over the years has attracted so many fantastic students from Africa. Pamela's career has been in the private sector. She was working in the private sector as a risk analyst before she came to us, and subsequently has carried on that career in some very well-known companies doing corporate risk analysis. But the interesting thing about Pamela is actually not her private sector career. It's the fact that during her period in lockdown in COVID, she became a scriptwriter. And her play on COVID has been performed in Zimbabwe recently, and it's available online should you wish to see it. I'm sure we can provide the links afterwards. So welcome to Pamela. And finally, on our panel, my colleague, Professor Liz David-Barrett, whose biography, of course, has many glowing things around academic achievements. She did her undergraduate studies and PhD, or DPhil as it's called, at Oxford. But most interestingly is that she has operated not simply as an academic, but also as a journalist. And again, if I look through the list of the organisations, The Economist, Financial Times, BBC World Service, these are the blue chip institutions. So it's a great pleasure to work alongside Liz. And I think what it plays to in my mind is part of what we're trying to do at the Centre for the Study of Corruption, which is not be dry academics around the subject of corruption, but really to turn this to practical use. And when you have the eyes of a journalist combined with the eyes of an academic, you have, first of all, a very different and very sophisticated understanding of the nature of the problems. But secondly, you're looking also for solutions. So that's something Liz has worked on so successfully with governments around the world, as was being outlined by our Vice-Chancellor earlier. Ladies and gentlemen, that is your panel for this evening. You don't need to applaud at this point. I am now going to go through a first round of questions, where, taking as our theme this issue of breaking free from state capture. And that's, of course, particularly relevant in the African context, but it's also relevant and very important to note in many, many other contexts around the world. So I'd like to emphasise that although we're looking at Africa in a bit of depth tonight because of the university's historical links with Africa, much of what we are discussing applies to many other contexts. And in fact, there's of course been a very interesting debate recently about how post-colonial worlds work within the context of the former Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, and not simply in those areas of the world where we traditionally use the term post-colonial. We're interested about, in our research at the Centre, what brings about moments of change when countries have been in a situation of state capture. How do you escape from that? And how can you capitalise on those moments? So I'm going to turn first to Liz on our panel and ask her, what do we really mean by this question of state capture? How does it relate to kleptocracy? And how do companies get locked into it? And what's the escape route? And for that tiny question, Liz, who is writing a book on this subject, has 2 minutes to answer.
Thank you, Robert. So state capture is something that I've become increasingly worried about in recent years. A lot of the time when we're talking about corruption, we're thinking about petty corruption, about people paying bribes to make the traffic police go away, or maybe to get your passport faster. And that sort of corruption is important. But actually what worries me much more is a much higher level and more serious and systemic form of corruption, which is state capture. And what's special about state capture is that it's where a narrow group of people manages to change the rules of the game. So if you think about that, paying a bribe to get your driving license, that's one transaction, the next person comes along, you haven't changed things for them. But if you've managed to influence the policy-making process, the legislature, if you've captured the state-owned enterprises through which much of the economy goes, then you've changed the rules of the game in a way that you then benefit from them, and you've got a baked-in advantage. Afterwards, whatever you do, it's not even going to be seen as illegal because you've managed to change the rules. And so that's what worries me about state capture. It's something I first came across when I was living in the Balkans as a journalist. It was very much part of that transition period in the late 90s, early 2000s in Eastern Europe and the former Soviet space. But it's something that we've seen rear its head recently all around the world. So in Hungary, one of those countries that I had worked on then, in Turkey under Erdogan, of course in Russia under Putin, but also increasingly we see it elsewhere in the world, in Brazil under Bolsonaro. And it's a really worrying form. What I would just say about it is it has increasingly become political. So whereas we used to see it as business people coming and capturing the state, it's increasingly something that is led by politicians. They might get elected democratically, but then they use their power to change the constitution, to take control of the implementation of the bureaucracy by putting all of their loyal allies in place, and also by disabling the institutions that are supposed to hold them to account.
Wow. Well, in about a year's time, you can write a book. Thank you, Liz. I'm going to come to Pamela next. And Pamela, Mo talked this evening, and as he has throughout his career, about this question of leadership. How do you think you can foster and develop the concept of leadership with integrity?
I'm going to quote Mo as well. I think this evening you said something around that businesses need good governance. And I think that's quite central to fostering an environment where leadership can thrive with integrity. I don't think that leadership can be filled with integrity unless the environment is conducive for it. And one of the key things about bringing about anti-corruption, I think, is about education. Educating our leaders, re-educating them once they get into power. I was speaking to you earlier, and integrity issues aren't as sexy, for example, as green issues. But I think they should be. That there should be awards, and more awards like the Mo Ibrahim Foundation's award, and recognition for preventing corruption in the same way we have with green awards. And that businesses should make this quite a central part of their culture and of how they do business. I know Liz has done a lot of work around collective action groups as well. And then if we just create an environment where anti-corruption and integrity are at the center, I think then we can foster and develop leaders with integrity.
Thank you. I'm going to abuse my position as chair and ask a very tempting follow-up question, which is, if you're in a very, very difficult environment, and you come from Zimbabwe, how easy is it to foster that kind of culture of integrity in very challenging environments?
It's not. And what I usually say to clients who I work with that are doing businesses in, tricky environments, and we're helping them to sort of navigate their way there, is that you need to do your homework. And once you've done your homework, check it, and then check it again. You need to understand who you're doing business with. Mo touched on understanding beneficial ownership, understanding who you're doing business with, their background. And then once you've done that, check again. And then I think from day one, businesses understand that paying bribes, being involved in corruption, it affects your bottom line immediately. So it might cost you a lot at the beginning, but in the long term, it will cost less by doing things the right way from day one.
Thank you, Pamela. And I should say that in my life before I was at Sussex University, I was running a non-governmental organisation called Transparency International, which specialises in corruption. I was always amazed by the courage, the enormous talent of our chapters, particularly in Africa. And in fact, the Zimbabwean chapter really stood out. And what always struck me is when I spoke to those leaders in those countries, the leaders of Transparency International, they were always giving a consistent message about how their peers, their citizens, were the victims of corruption. And that, in any society where the kind of state capture that Liz is talking about takes hold, then you have a small elite effectively exploiting the rest of the population. And that, to some extent, is the challenge that faces us. And if you unlock that, then you will find the citizens are able to operate in the way that one would hope. Valerie, Mo, yes.
I'd really like to ask Liz a question, if I may.
Oh, please do, yes.
And Liz, I was really interested in what you were saying about state capture. And of course, one of the things that Mo raised was that we can't look at countries in isolation, that these issues around corruption happen in partnership with other countries. And I wondered if you felt able to say something about what's happening with the US in relation to the Supreme Court, the storming of the Capitol, those a kind of undermining of democratic institutions over time. And what we are seeing here in the UK with, what we're learning about procurement and corruption in the context of, COVID and PPE, the issues around the prorogation of Parliament. So we're constantly looking out, but how much looking into our own societies do we need to do so that we don't slide into something with our eyes half closed?
Yeah, absolutely. And I really liked what Mo said earlier about, I wrote it down, before we talk about corruption there, we need to talk about corruption here. And I think that's what's implicit in your question. So I think there are a couple of ways in which this is relevant to state capture. So one is clearly the role played by the West in enabling and facilitating kleptocracy around the world. And this is something that has taken off really with globalization because it is so easy to not just move money around, but to hide it. And we've seen that there are many Western companies that are absolutely happy to play a role in that. You see it in the South African state capture, of course, where you've had management consultancy companies, highly reputable, respected companies that are absolutely playing a core role in facilitating that state capture, not to mention making it easy to launder money afterwards. So that's one way in which it's relevant. But also, Valerie, you talked about this decline and erosion of democratic institutions and values. And that's very much part of this, I think. So for me, in Hungary, Orban is actually one of the trendsetters in this. He started to completely violate EU principles of democracy. And what happened? Nothing. And I think that's really contributed to a situation in which Donald Trump gets elected, again starts to completely violate fundamental principles of the way that the US and democracies in general work. Again, with some resistance from the institutions, but was nearly re-elected. So I think that there is a real sense that we've been relying largely on people to do the right thing and follow conventions for a long time. And there are many people around in leadership roles at the moment who are not playing that game anymore. And it's really time then for the institutions and all of us as accountability checks to stand up and make sure that we push back on that.
Thank you, Liz. And that plays very nicely to the question I was going to ask Valerie, which really comes from what Mo was saying, the culpability of the UK, not just in our own democratic backsliding, but actually as maybe an enabler of global corruption. And Valerie, I'm wondering what sort of role do you think a G7 country should be playing in this sort of emerging state capture that we see across the world?
Well, I think that G7 countries have a huge role to play. I mean, in terms of international rules and norms, how those norms are upheld, what you do in terms of the accountability mechanisms, what you do nationally in terms of your own policies, practices, your own legislation. Liz talked about you've got to have somewhere to hide your money. How transparent are our banking systems? So there are a whole range of things that I think countries can do individually and collectively to set a global framework. But it's not only about creating the framework. You have to monitor what's going on, and you have to be serious about holding those countries, those individuals, holding the companies accountable for what they're doing. And we're not doing sufficient of that.
Thank you. That's extremely clear, and I think very much plays into what Mo was saying. Mo, I'm going to come to you now. There are many places in which Valerie's and Mo's names appear together, not least in Mo's foundation. One of them is there was a letter to the FT in 2016, just before the anti-corruption summit that was held in London, which you both signed, and you said, global corruption in all its forms, from looting state budgets to laundering money, is one of the most unjust, corrosive and dangerous issues of our time. It doesn't just hinder economies, it prevents people from reaching their full potential. One of our themes tonight is about youth and youth leadership, and that's because we are, both in our Centre for the Study of Corruption, but in the university as a whole, helping train a next generation of leaders, both from Africa and elsewhere. I'm very interested to know whether, in your study of leadership, whether you think there's a specific role for young people and youth movements.
Absolutely. Really, before I start, just for the sake of transparency, I do have a board now Yeah, we have to be transparent. And otherwise, I really think it is really important for the young people to really start to play their role, because we are facing so many challenges, not only in Africa, even here. We have the challenge of climate. And to be honest, we all people, we don't care, personally, in the sense that we're going to be dead. Of course I care. But what I'm saying, it does not affect me. I'm going to be dead before things go bad. But it is you, young guys. That's your future, and your children's future. You need to get crazy about this stuff, and you are not. I mean, many African, we have young African fellowships, we have a network of young people and work with them. Many times, young people come to me and say, oh, you guys, you need to empower us. And I say, we need us to empower you? No, nobody will empower you. You can empower yourself. Take control. Nobody's going to hand you power. You go and grab the power. We have, young people are the largest constituency in Africa. Largest constituency. If they're a party, if they're organized, they're going to rule every single African country. And then they sit back and say, oh, please empower me. It doesn't work like that. Young people need to be motivated, organized, to go and take power. You need to put up, good people, go to election. Use the ballot box. Why Brexit happened here? Because young people did not want to vote. And then they go out demonstrating. Excuse me. Use your democratic right, put out the bad guys, bring on the bad guys, impose your agenda. This is the future of those young guys. And I really hope to see stronger movement of young people. That's our future, and the future is in our hands. And you need to do it.
Thank you, Mo.
Can I add to Mo's?
Yes, please do.
To Mo's points, because I think it's really important, and I think that some of what our young people are doing, young people on the African continent, using technology, using social media, calling out the corruption, making it visible, follow the money, budget, all of these things are so, so important, because what they're doing is they're educating not just other young people, they're educating all of us. They are translating what is often sold as complicated and complex financial information. They are simplifying it, they are making it available, they're making it relevant, they're helping people to understand that what is being stolen from them has a major impact on their quality of life. And, one of the huge tragedies, I feel, on the African continent is that if you look at areas like health, education, where there should be major investments in these areas, where the expectations of citizens should be raised, those expectations are constantly diminished because they're told that the money and the resources aren't there. But why? So asking those questions and really being much more transparent in the way that this information is made available is absolutely crucial. And I think that, the young people who are campaigning on these issues are doing a really incredible job.
Rob, if you talk about young people, I really want to salute the youth of Sudan. Those guys have been out there toppling a terrible military dictatorship. The young people, it's not the political, the young people there. Until now, they are fighting all those dictators, the military peacock who try to control the country. Today, they are still demonstrating, surrounding the palace, etc. And this is wonderful. I really love those guys. The commitment for 2.5 years now. Those guys have been fighting a country which is ruled by 11 armies. We have 11 armies in our country.
Thank you, Mo. I'm going to invite questions from the